Kevin Marsh realized that the problem with trying to impress aliens was that you never really knew what counted as impressive. He'd been working on the Veloran trading station for 6 months now, long enough to learn the language, understand the customs, and develop an absolutely embarrassing crush on Lissa, the cargo supervisor who had shoulders like a swimmer and eyes the color of polished amber. The Velorans were a graceful species, tall and willowy, with skin that shimmered faintly in hues of blue and violet. They moved like dancers, spoke in musical tones, and treated physical labor as an art form. Kevin, by contrast, was a 5'10" maintenance technician from Cleveland who considered pizza a food group. "You're staring again," his roommate Tony said, not looking up from his data pad. Kevin dragged his attention away from where Lissa was directing a loading crew with elegant hand gestures. "I'm observing workplace dynamics. You're drooling over your supervisor." "She's not my supervisor." Tony finally looked up, grinning. "You should talk to her." "I do talk to her. Yesterday I said excuse me when she walked past." "Wow, real smooth." Kevin slumped against the corridor wall. The truth was, he had no idea how to approach someone like Lissa. Every Veloran on the station seemed to exist on a different plane of grace and competence. They were poets, artists, philosophers. He fixed air filters and unclogged recycling units. "There's a festival next week," Tony offered. "Maybe you'll see her there." The Festival of Strength, as Kevin discovered, was less a celebration and more a cultural institution. Velorans prized physical achievement as a form of self-expression, and once every solar cycle, their homeworld hosted competitions that drew participants from across their colonies. Kevin had no intention of attending until he overheard Lissa mention she'd be there. "You're competing?" her friend asked in the dining hall. Lissa laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "No, I'm just watching. I appreciate the artistry even if I'm not built for competition." "The demonstrations are always beautiful," the friend agreed. Kevin's brain latched onto a single thought. Lissa would be watching. And if he happened to be there, participating, showing off just a little, maybe she'd notice him. Maybe she'd see he wasn't just the guy who fixed broken equipment. Tony thought this was the worst idea in human history. "You don't know anything about their competitions," he said as Kevin researched Veloran strength sports on his terminal. "You're going to embarrass yourself. I go to the gym sometimes. You go to the gym twice a month and spend most of it sitting on equipment while checking your messages. That's still going." The registration process was surprisingly easy. The Velorans welcomed all participants, regardless of species or skill level. The competitions were meant to be inclusive celebrations of physical culture. Kevin signed up for the basic strength category, figuring he'd do a few lifts, flex a little, and catch Lissa's eye from across the arena. Simple. 5 days flew by, and Kevin found himself standing in the arena. It was magnificent, an open-air structure carved from pale stone, with banners rippling in the breeze and thousands of spectators filling the curved seating. Kevin arrived early, wearing the simple athletic clothes the organizers had provided, and tried not to panic. The Veloran competitors were warming up with movements that looked like Tai Chi crossed with gymnastics. They were lean and elegant, their muscles defined but not bulky. Kevin, with his average human build, felt like a bulldog at a greyhound convention. Then he spotted Lissa in the stands, sitting with a group of friends, and his determination solidified. He was doing this. The first event was called the Ascending Hold. Competitors had to lift a weighted bar above their heads and hold it steady for as long as possible. The weights were calibrated for Veloran physiology, a challenge but not impossible. Kevin watched 3 competitors go before him. The best managed to hold the bar for 38 seconds, which drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. When his name was called, Kevin approached the platform, gripped the bar, and lifted. It was lighter than he expected. He settled into the hold, arms locked, and waited. After 40 seconds, Kevin's shoulders were starting to burn a little, but nothing he couldn't handle. He'd held heavier weights back home during his sporadic gym sessions. At 60 seconds, the announcer's voice rose in pitch. At 90, the crowd was roaring. Kevin glanced around, confused by the reaction. Was he doing it wrong? A Veloran official approached, gesturing for him to lower the weight. Kevin complied, and the official examined the bar as if checking for defects. Finding none, she stared at Kevin with something between amazement and suspicion. "The record was 42 seconds, she said in accented standard. "Held for 118 years. Kevin blinked. "Oh, sorry, sorry," she tilted her head. You just shattered a century-old record and you apologize. The crowd erupted in applause. Kevin stood frozen on the platform, utterly baffled, while the announcer proclaimed him the winner of the first event. Up in the stands, he saw Lissa sitting forward, staring at him with wide eyes. Well, she'd noticed him. Mission accomplished, right? Except the officials were already ushering him toward the next event. The ground draw involved pulling a weighted sled across a marked distance. The current record holder had moved it 12 meters in an impressive display. Kevin watched the technique, grabbed the harness, and pulled. The sled practically glided behind him. He crossed the 12-meter line before he realized he should probably stop. The crowd was making a noise he'd never heard before, a high, trilling sound that might have been shock or excitement or both. 28 meters, the official announced, her voice faint. Kevin turned to see the sled resting at nearly double the previous record. Several Velorans were examining the equipment again. One official picked up the weights to verify their authenticity. "Is this thing broken?" Kevin asked. "The equipment is standard," the official replied. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Are you enhanced?" "Enhanced." "No, I'm just a regular guy." "Regular," she repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. The third event was grip strength, measured by crushing a calibrated device. The best Veloran score was 34 units. Kevin squeezed the device casually and watched the display tick up to 89. The crowd had moved beyond excitement into something like religious fervor. By the fourth event, a test of leg strength involving squats with a weighted pack, Kevin realized what was happening. The Velorans were a graceful, elegant species, adapted to their slightly lower gravity homeworld. They were strong by their standards, but human evolution on Earth, with its higher gravity and history of persistence hunting, had built bodies designed for raw, stubborn endurance. He wasn't superhuman, he was just human, and on Velora that made him a freak of nature. He completed the squat challenge without thinking, his legs pumping steadily until the officials begged him to stop. The previous record had been 93 repetitions. Kevin had passed 200 before they called it. When the final scores were tallied, Kevin had broken every record in his category, most by margins that seemed almost insulting. The crowd chanted his name, or their approximation of it, which sounded like Kevin Marsha. Officials surrounded him, asking questions he barely understood. Someone draped a ceremonial sash over his shoulders, and through it all, he searched the crowd for Lissa. He found her near the competitor's exit, waiting with an expression he couldn't decipher. Kevin approached, suddenly aware of how sweaty and disheveled he must look. She spoke before he could. "That was incredible. Thanks. I mean, I didn't know I was going to break every record in our documented history." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Yes, that seemed unintentional." Kevin rubbed the back of his neck. "I was just trying to impress you." The words escaped before he could stop them. Lissa's eyes widened and Kevin wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. "Impress me?" she said. "I saw you in the dining hall, talking about the festival, and I thought maybe if you saw me doing something athletic, you'd think I was interesting. Which sounds really stupid now that I'm saying it out loud." Lissa studied him for a long moment. Then she laughed, that wind chime sound he'd been hearing in his dreams for months. "You became a legendary folk hero to get my attention. I didn't mean to become legendary, I just wanted you to notice my biceps." She laughed harder, and other Velorans stopped to stare. "Your biceps," she repeated. "Kevin, you broke the ascending hold record by over a minute. There are scholars who have dedicated their lives to studying that event. You destroyed it in your first attempt, and you wanted me to notice your biceps. When you say it like that, it sounds even worse." Lissa stepped closer, still smiling. "I noticed you months ago. You helped repair the air circulation system in Cargo Bay 3 last season. You stayed late every night for a week, covered in grease, refusing to quit until it was perfect. You sang while you worked, badly but enthusiastically." Kevin's brain short-circuited. "You noticed that?" "I noticed lots of things about you, Kevin Marsh, but I thought you'd never speak to me. You always seemed nervous. Because you're amazing and I'm just the human who accidentally became a Veloran legend." She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers cool against his overheated skin. "I think that qualifies as interesting." A cluster of officials approached, interrupting the moment. The lead organizer, an elderly Veloran with ceremonial markings, approached. "Kevin Marsh, the Council of Games requests your presence at the Grand Festival tomorrow. Your achievements today will be recorded in our archives of excellence. You have brought honor to yourself and your species." Kevin glanced at Lissa, who was trying not to laugh. That's very kind, but we wish to study your training methods, another official interjected. To understand how such feats are possible, perhaps you would consent to demonstrations. Educational programs, the young will want to learn from the master of strength. I'm not a master of anything, I work in maintenance. The officials exchanged confused looks. One spoke rapidly in Veloran to the others, then turned back to Kevin. You are humble. This is an admirable quality in a champion. They swept away, still discussing plans, and Kevin turned to Lissa with a helpless expression. What just happened? She linked her arm through his, guiding him away from the growing crowd. You became accidentally famous. There will be statues, probably, songs. Possibly a national holiday. I just wanted a date. Lissa stopped walking and faced him fully. Then ask me. Kevin's mouth went dry. After everything that had happened today, the impossible records, the shocked crowds, the officials proclaiming him a master, this felt like the scariest moment of all. But Lissa was looking at him with those amber eyes, waiting, and he realized she was just as nervous as he was. Would you like to have dinner with me? He managed. Somewhere that's not a festival or arena or place where people will ask me to lift things. Yes, she said immediately. I would like that very much. The grand festival the next day was overwhelming. Kevin stood on a raised platform while thousands of Velorans celebrated, waving banners embroidered with his name. Scholars requested interviews, artists asked to sketch him. Children wanted to touch the strong human for luck. Through it all, Lissa stayed at his side, translating the more complex requests and occasionally rescuing him from overeager admirers. When a particularly enthusiastic delegation proposed building a training facility in his honor, she politely suggested they discuss it at a later date. You're handling this well, Kevin murmured as they escaped to a quieter corner. Someone has to, you look like you're facing an execution. I fix air filters for a living. Yesterday I was nobody. Today there are people composing poems about me. Lissa squeezed his hand. You were never nobody. Not to me. They found a small restaurant far from the festival grounds, tucked into a side street where the noise faded to a distant hum. The owner recognized Kevin immediately and tried to refuse payment, but Lissa handled it with diplomatic grace. Over dinner, they talked. Kevin learned that Lissa had studied engineering before moving into logistics, that she'd grown up on a colony ship and still dreamed of space travel, that she found most Veloran poetry pretentious, but loved old adventure stories. The ones where explorers discover new worlds and have wild adventures, she said, her eyes bright. Not very sophisticated, but exciting. That's how I feel about action movies, Kevin admitted. Everyone says they're mindless, but sometimes you just want to watch things explode. Exactly, she leaned forward. Do humans have good adventure stories? So many. I could show you some if you want. I want. They stayed in the restaurant until closing, talking about everything and nothing, and when they finally stepped back into the night, Kevin felt like he could float. The next week brought more complications. The Veloran government formally requested that Kevin participate in an educational program about cross-species physical training. Media from across Veloran space wanted interviews. A sculptor asked permission to create a memorial statue for the capital city. Kevin attended meetings in a daze, agreeing to reasonable requests and deflecting the more absurd ones. Through it all, Lissa helped him navigate the bureaucracy, laughing at the most ridiculous proposals and helping him craft polite refusals. They want to name a month after you, she reported after one particularly long council session. Please tell me you said no. I said you were honored but felt it would be inappropriate given your short time in Veloran society. You're a genius. I'm a cargo supervisor. I deal with inflated egos all the time, she grinned. Although usually they're not folk heroes. Kevin agreed to a series of demonstration sessions at the arena, showing basic human exercise techniques to interested Velorans. The sessions were packed, with thousands watching him perform simple bodyweight exercises and basic lifts. What was routine to him seemed miraculous to the Velorans, whose lighter gravity made such sustained exertion difficult. He tried to explain the difference, to contextualize his abilities, but the crowds preferred their narrative of the strong human who came from the stars. Kevin learned to accept it with as much grace as he could muster. What made it bearable was Lissa. They spent every free moment together, stealing time between his obligations and her work. They watched human movies in his cramped quarters and Veloran performances in open-air theaters. They argued playfully about music and food and the best type of spacecraft design. They fit together in a way that felt effortless and right. One evening, 3 weeks after the festival, they sat on an observation deck overlooking the city. The sky was violet fading to deep purple and the first stars were appearing overhead. "Do you regret it?" Lissa asked. Entering the competition, Kevin considered the question. His life had become complicated in ways he never imagined. He was famous on a planet that wasn't his homeworld, respected for abilities he'd never considered special, unable to walk through public spaces without being recognized. But Lissa was tucked against his side, her head on his shoulder, and her hand was warm in his. "No," he said, "I don't regret it at all." "Good." She tilted her face up toward his. "Because I'm very glad you wanted to show off your biceps." He kissed her, and somewhere in the distance, the city celebrated its newest legend, but Kevin barely noticed. He'd entered a competition to impress a girl and accidentally become a hero. He'd broken records that stood for over a century just by being himself. But the real victory was right here, in this moment, with Lissa smiling against his lips and the stars coming out overhead. The Veloran Council of Games eventually created a new competition category for species with high-gravity adaptations, ensuring that future human competitors would have fair comparisons. Kevin's records remained in the archives, marked with an asterisk and a lengthy explanation about Earth's gravitational influence on human development. Kevin returned to his maintenance job, though the crew now treated him with a bemused respect that made routine work surreal. Lissa still supervised cargo operations, directing her teams with the same elegant efficiency. But their evenings belonged to them. They explored the city together, finding quiet places away from Kevin's fame. They made plans, tentative at first, then more concrete. Lissa applied for a transfer to a research station closer to human space. Kevin looked into engineering courses, inspired by her stories of spacecraft design. On the 3-month anniversary of the Festival of Strength, the Veloran government unveiled a small statue in the arena's Hall of Champions. It depicted Kevin in mid-lift, captured in bronze with an inscription that read, "Kevin Marsh, the strong human who reminded us that strength takes many forms, and that sometimes the greatest achievements are accidental." Kevin stood before it with Lissa, shaking his head. "That's the most diplomatic way I've ever heard someone say this guy had no idea what he was doing." Lissa laughed and took his hand. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You were trying to impress me. Did it work?" She pulled him close, kissing him in front of the statue while a handful of tourists took pictures. "What do you think?" Kevin thought about his tiny apartment back on the trading station, about fixing air filters and unclogging pipes. He thought about the moment he'd seen Lissa and decided she was worth the risk of embarrassment. He thought about lifting a weight that felt too light and shattering records he didn't know existed. Life, he decided, was full of happy accidents. "I think," he said, pulling her closer, "that I should enter more competitions." Lissa elbowed him lightly. "Don't you dare. One folk hero incident is enough. But what if there's a cooking competition? I make excellent scrambled eggs. Kevin. Or a singing competition. You said I sing enthusiastically. I said you sing badly. Enthusiastically badly. That's a skill." They left the arena still laughing, walking through streets where Kevin was recognized and celebrated, but none of it mattered as much as the woman beside him. He wanted to show off his biceps and ended up finding something infinitely better. The folk songs would be sung for generations. The records would stand in the archives, asterisks and all. Young Velorans would study his techniques and marvel at human physiology. But Kevin Marsh, maintenance technician from Cleveland, had achieved something far more important than athletic glory. He'd found someone who laughed at his jokes, supported his dreams, and loved him for exactly who he was, accidental legend and all. And really, that was the greatest victory of all.